Hello everyone and welcome to this week's episode of Minecraft Disney's Q&A. It's a series in which I sort of wander around here in the mcmagic.us server and answer questions that you guys ask about Disney. And that ranges from anything from the movies and the shows to the theme parks to its history to touring guide advice, things like that, and even, I guess, personal questions in terms of what should go on with the parks. Anyway, I've collected some questions, some great questions this week, and I'm going to dive right in, and we're going to tour Epcot a little bit. I'm probably just going to wander around Future World and World Showcase a little bit. So first up, we have TJ Neon, who asks, 1, what is the most underrated ride in Walt Disney World? I guess something with low attendance but a lasting impression. And 2, is it possible to lose any limbs in Space Mountain? I always want to put my hands up, but even though I'm short, I chicken out and huddle my body. So let's get the easy one out of the way. You cannot lose limbs in Space Mountain. I mean, I guess technically if you found a way to get out of your safety constraints and like stand up on the ride, you could get injured. But as long as you don't do anything foolish like that, I think you're safe. You could definitely raise your hands on the ride. I'd probably feel a little worried if I was like 7'5", but I suspect they would say something about it when you get on. Disney, if nothing else, is an extremely safe place to be. That doesn't mean it hasn't had its instances of injuries, both minor and severe, but more or less the track record, when you consider how many people go to Disney World, it's an extremely safe place. Especially a ride like that, they would definitely test for things like that. That's one of those sort of illusions you get with the darkness of the ride that makes it feel more constrained than it actually is. And now onto your first question, what's the most underrated ride? Now that's interesting. Now again, like I mentioned the previous week, Disney does not actually share attendance information when it comes to rides. So technically on the books, there's no way of really knowing what the most underrated ride is. If I had to guess, I mean, what you can look at, I mean, Disney is an evolving place, right? So if a ride is updated or changed or removed, odds are it didn't have great attendance. We're walking towards Mission Space right now, which used to be Horizons, which used to be one of my favorite rides. But the fact of the matter is they had to remove it. Now there are a bunch of rumors as to why, some of them involving the stability of the building that it was in, but there's no doubt that the attendance was also pretty low. If I had to take a guess as to what attraction today is probably the least attended, my guess would unfortunately be the Carousel of Progress. For one, it's not a continuous ride. It isn't even a fast-loading ride similar to like Space Mountain. It's, one theater at a time. It could probably put a decent number of people through, but I don't know, just anecdotal evidence. The last few times I've ever been on it in my last few trips, it's always nearly empty. Yet I think it's there because Disney acknowledges that it is a very important part of Disney history because Walt had such a big part in the creation of it, so much so that they renamed it to Walt Disney's Carousel of Progress, which is why I hope it will never go anywhere. If anything, they keep it open as like some sort of historical piece. It's also another sign that an attraction's usually like on its last legs is they switch it to a seasonal, which means for part of the year they will turn off the ride and you can't ride it. And Carousel of Progress was seasonal for a while, and a lot of people thought that meant that it was going to be shut down pretty soon. And luckily that was then changed and it is back. So that's my guess. But great question. We're headed over to the World Showcase. I love whenever I do pop on the server occasionally and hang out with people on here, because usually there are a lot of people and it'll bug the rides. So I try to do marathon runs around World Showcase, little digital ones. Anyway, moving on, we have, I'm probably going to mispronounce this, I apologize, 760 Paradisphere. Do you think I love this question, by the way. Do you think the adding of Starbucks and other such things in the parks is a result of over-commercializing the Disney company in itself? That's a fantastic question. So if you're unfamiliar, recently they've swapped out a few places for Starbucks. They've actually done it here in Disney World too, as well as Disneyland. And, you have different places you can eat. I know there's a McDonald's on property. So the question is it the result of over-commercializing the Disney company? I think my short answer is no, I don't think so. I think what has changed most over the years is our outlook on the commercializing of a company. You have to understand, Disney in its inception, Disneyland, was built upon this concept of getting companies and corporations to sponsor these rides, and you were advertising the company. Carousel of Progress, a ride we were just talking about, was sponsored by General Electric, and you would bet that every appliance in that ride was a General Electric appliance, and it said big on the sign, sponsored by General Electric. I think at its core, the way this place was built, it was very much one that embraced the commercialization of an adventure like this. And oh, look, what are they doing? Something here in Mexico? Why is it blocked off? Interesting. I guess we'll go this way. So I don't think it's a bad thing too. I mean, if you think back fondly on like the older rides, it didn't degrade the quality at all. You know, you never looked at a ride and it didn't feel tacky. I think the closest it felt to over commercializing was an attraction in the Magic Kingdom that became If You Had Wings, I believe it was called, was the original ride, and then it became Delta's Dream Flight. These were two rides. It was in the same building, actually. It's now the Buzz Lightyear Space Ranger Spin. They were the only free rides at the time. Well, they had switched over to the ticket system by Delta Dream Flight. But If You Had Wings was the only free ride in Disney World back when you had to pay per ride. You bought a ticket book. And fun fact, that's where the term e-ticket attraction comes from, when they explain a very big roller coaster would be considered an e-ticket attraction, is because back then you had different tickets. You had A through E, and E was the biggest, so it was the most expensive ticket, but it was for the biggest rides. And If You Had Wings was the only one that was free, and it was so heavily sponsored, and it was like riding a commercial for I think it was Southwest Airlines. And same thing with Delta Dream Flight. It was called Delta Dream Flight. It was about flying Delta and all the places, and so much so that when you walked off of If You Had Wings, there would be a travel agent in the post-ride area where you could book a flight to some other vacation spot or back to Disney again. So it's something that's been at the root of Disney. What I think has changed, honestly, is we look more cynically upon things like that today. I mean, you have to understand, in the 50s and even in the early 60s, we didn't look at the commercialization of stuff as a bad thing. What's it saying there? Do you like glass? Glass is my favorite color. Huh, okay, well, we're going to have to go back to Future World. So when we see things like a Starbucks or a McDonald's pop up in Disney World, it doesn't seem as classy as it might have back in, the mid-1950s, when you trusted companies and you had these great associations with companies and you didn't see them as just like money-hungry entities. So I think that's really what's changed. And I think, honestly, the fact that Disney had died before Disney World even opened, and they still so heavily cling to the values that he brought to the table to make this place a success, gives me the faith that even if they're going to put a McDonald's in there, it would be done in such a way that it doesn't seem totally tacky. Like, I can't promise that, hey, there's a flash flood warning in my area. I should probably not go out in the streets, I guess. Okay. Moving on to the next question. That was a great question, and I think it's one that's totally worth discussing, because there is a line, right? There is too far, and before you know it, it's a little too tacky. And I think as long as that question's always asked, they will be forced to think about that and make sure that they're on the right side of that line. We have Unification, who asks, what is, in your opinion, the best way to get through Hollywood Studios? You know what? Let's just go to Hollywood Studios. I like that we can do that. Whenever I go, I always find long lines going one way or the other. What is the best way to ride all the rides there while running into the smallest lines possible? Now, this has become an art form, and one I admittedly am not the best at. Hollywood Studios is indeed not very symmetrical. I think just by the nature of it, it was initially built to be a half-day theme park, and it was expanded upon. It wasn't planned with expansions in mind. And I think for that reason, like, you have Sunset Boulevard is sort of like this offshoot here to this main, I think this is Hollywood Boulevard. And then it sort of curves around. Honestly, my advice would be go grab fast passes for the big ticket rides. Those are your Rock and Roller Coasters, your Toy Story Midway Mania, your Tower of Terror, and I guess Star Tours now that it's refurbed. And just bounce around. I mean, I guess it's different for every person in your type of touring. If you're looking for very efficient, then I would suggest that if you do some research into touring plans, they'd have a lot more specific guides where they go through and they say, hey, this is the most efficient way. Go to this ride, this ride, this ride at this time of day, and you will have the least amount of lines. Personally, I think part of what makes Disney World amazing is the atmosphere that it builds, and part of enjoying that atmosphere is taking the time to soak it in. So I'm going to be 100% honest with you. I rarely use FastPass because I actually don't mind queuing up for rides. Now, that said, I think it's different for everybody. For one, I'm a native New Yorker. I grew up here. I was raised here. I walk everywhere. So for me, the idea of going from Tower of Terror and then bouncing to, lights, motor, action, and then bouncing back here for roller coaster, for the Rock and Roller Coaster, is like no problem for me because I'm like always walking everywhere. So the walking is never an issue for me. And as somebody who goes to Penny Arcade Expo, PAX East, every year and sits in lines for hours and hours, like a 60-minute queue for like Toy Story is nothing. So I feel like I can't speak for everyone because it is a very different situation, but I mean, utilize those fast passes, grab those tickets, go do something else. The one thing I wouldn't suggest is don't turn away from too many rides because there are long lines, because what you will find is you will find yourself wasting the day looking for a ride and not riding anything. So, maybe you go to Tower of Terror and it's got a super long line, and you go, okay, let's go to Rock and Roller Coaster, and that also has a long line. I wouldn't keep looking. Just at that point, I would just hop in a line and ride something. I've gone with friends and where, halfway through the day we've ridden one or two rides because they spend too much time looking for the perfect ride that has a great line, and you can't find it because it's a popular place. So hopefully that helps. Yeah, there is no like clear path to take here. It's just sort of wherever you want to go. I mean, there are two camps when it comes to touring at Disney. There are people who are very militant and have a plan and they follow that plan to a T, and then there are people who like will just totally wing it. And I will say I grew up with a family that was very up at the crack of dawn and there at rope drop and doing rides as efficiently as possible. And now as an adult who goes with friends, I play it all by ear. Maybe it's a little bit of like late adult rebellion or something, but I totally enjoy just winging it completely down to like, hey, we rode 4 rides here. I want to go to Magic Kingdom. Let's go to Magic Kingdom. Always get the park hopper, in my opinion. Always worth it. But I could talk about that another episode. Let's see, what else do we have? Laugh-A-Lot54 says, this is a similar question. I'm going to Disney World this October, and I've always wondered which direction of the circular parks, like Magic Kingdom and the World Showcase of Epcot, do you walk around? I've heard that starting on your left and going clockwise is better since most people start on the right and go counterclockwise, but is it true? I'm going to be 100% honest. I don't have any statistics on which is more popular. I will say, I think... For one, for World Showcase, I don't think it matters that much. I think people go both ways. And just by the nature of that part, I'm just going to watch for a minute these people trying to parkour up the hat. Just for the nature of, like, it's not like a ride part of the park. I think it shouldn't make a difference. And for things like the Magic Kingdom or like Future World, I don't think I think you'll get like the hardcore touring people, like the ones I just mentioned. They will stick to a plan like that and stick to a rule of thumb. But otherwise, it's like Magic Kingdom rope drops. It doesn't matter what direction. People aren't going to go in a direction. They're going to go straight to Space Mountain or Splash Mountain or Big Thunder Mountain or, the Haunted Mansion. They're going to go to the big name rides and then sort of wander from there. That said, if you do want to limit the amount of bouncing around, then, regardless of whether you go clockwise or counterclockwise, it is a good idea to pick one and just stick with it. Personally, I always go counterclockwise, and that has nothing to do with attendance or lines. It has purely to do with the fact that I love Tomorrowland, so it's always the first place I want to go. But then there are days where I go, clockwise, and it just sort of, I don't think it really makes a difference. I mean, there are minor ones where, I've also heard that if you go right on the Space Mountain lines, it will be shorter than the left Space Mountain line. Although now it's like the last time I've been on it for a few times. Are they like warping back down? The last time I've been on it, the past few times, it's like some of it was fast pass, and that sort of gets reappropriated. This is really interesting. I love, maybe there's a warp plate up there that brings them back down. So moving on, let's see. Josh Lease, I'm sorry, asks, have you ever been to Disney Quest? I think it's dated and should be replaced. I 100% agree. If you don't know what Disney Quest is, it's an indoor, like 3-story building that's supposed to be, essentially, they pitched it as sort of like a mini theme park that's all indoors and that is all digital. So, like, they have one of the very rudimentary versions of the design your own roller coaster and ride it sort of thing. Stuff like that. If you go to it, it's just like super 1990s, and I agree that it's sort of outdated and that you could do something better with that space. I think, kudos to them for trying and, pushing the limits, and maybe they thought that would be the new generation of a theme park would look like that, but it was not the case. Thanks for that question, Josh. Jordan Mann asks, do you like Epcot as a theme park, or would you have preferred it to be a futuristic city? So in last week's episode, I mentioned how Epcot was originally designed to be a futuristic, functional city with actual residents living in it. Personally, I think it's better as a theme park. And I think this, and I say this as I'm a huge futurist, and I love the idea of a city of the future. However, I do genuinely believe that it would not have worked, and not to Walt's, not to discredit him. The guy was a visionary, but he could not have seen how the world would have turned out. And the way the world did turn out is that, this is backwards, by the way. I believe that is over here. Maybe I'm wrong. Back then, the idea of having companies show off new technology was great because we had things like the World Fair where that's exactly what they were doing, or replacing things with new technology every other couple of years would have been great because that's the rate at the way things were going. But today it's like, my iPhone will be obsolete in 12 months, and Android phones faster. So like, technology moves super fast, and on top of that, I don't think there are many companies who are willing to share that sort of stuff beforehand. Why would Apple do that? Why would Apple put an iMac in every home in Epcot to show the world what it's like? One, they're successful enough that they don't have to. And two, in today's internet marketing world, I don't think that is an efficient way to show off the company. So I don't think it would have worked. I think it works better as a theme park. Though I would have loved to see how he tried to pull it off. We're going to ride some. Whoop. I believe that is me starving. Yes, that is me starving. Well, get used to that sound effect. Let's see. Next, moving on, we have the Disney Lover 71. How do you think Roy was able to revive the Disney Corporation? I remember in your older videos you mentioned Disney almost failing. How was Roy able to pull it off and keep Disney alive? So I mentioned in earlier videos that Disney in the mid-'80s or early '80s was not in good shape. I'm probably going to have to get off this ride and get food. I can't do that. Okay. Yeah, they were close to being hostily taken over and split up and sold for pieces. The animation division and the film division and stuff like that. Luckily, Roy was able to sort of coordinate this corporate takeover from within, in which it forced Card Walker to resign, and in its place was Frank Wells and Michael Eisner, and they turned the whole company around. Now, the real answer is kind of boring. It's just all corporate. It's corporate strategy. He knew the right people on the Disney board to convince. Am I flying? What was that? He knew the right people on the board to convince, Card. I believe it was Card Walker at that point, to step down, and he made the right sort of pitch and deal to Eisner and Wells to get them on board, and it was just a matter of getting the right people. Once you got the right people in there, they were able to turn that company around like within a year or two and save it, and then at that point it ballooned and became like this massive sort of company. So if you want to know more about that and that sort of history, there is a fantastic book called Disney War. I unfortunately don't remember the name of the author. I read this a couple of years ago. Something Stewart, I want to say. But if you... James Stewart, I believe. But if you look it up, Disney War, it's a kind of a long read, but it covers Michael Eisner's entire tenure at the Walt Disney Company, and it really explains how that company went from being on its last legs to being the massive company that you see today, and then Eisner sort of, not to be melodramatic, but becoming the villain of sorts, and then being ousted himself for Bob Iger, who is now the CEO. But it's a great book, a great read, and a great look into how a company of that size just operates. Moving on, we have Jared Garcia. I also have a question. In what year did Disney start becoming so popular, and what was the source or reason for Disney turning into such a big company? So I guess that's sort of a similar thing. So if you read Disney War, it'll talk about them becoming a big company. Disney pre-Eisner was not like this multinational conglomerate that it is today, and I think a lot of people don't realize that. They think Disney's like this big evil corporation, and that it always has been, but it really hasn't. Eisner found that Disney World was underpriced when he took over, and there was an era where Disney was super popular and well known and world famous, but not necessarily the most powerful company. So it's sort of hard to answer that first part of the question, when did they become so popular? I mean, Disney's Mickey cartoons were popular almost instantly, so you could almost go back to the 30s and 40s and say that that's when Disney became popular. Disney World and Disneyland were popular pretty much straight out of the gate. A lot of people thought he was crazy for building Disneyland, but he went with it anyway, and it was a huge hit right off the bat. Of course, it had its troubles, but that's a whole other story for another episode. And then from there, there was this sort of renaissance at Disney in the 90s and the late 80s with Eisner. And, they call it the 90s the Disney decade. And it was thanks to what they did. And that's what turned it from, this fairly weak yet very well-known company to an extremely powerful and, household name. Its popularity remained the same, but it most definitely... How do I get out of here? Oh. Perfect. It became more powerful under Eisner's reign. So Disney War. There's another book called Keys to the Kingdom. I guess it's a lighter read if you don't want to read all of Disney War. And it sort of covers the similar topics. But I would highly suggest Disney War first. Pelican Productions 67 asks, how do you think Walt would react if he saw Walt Disney World today? Well, I think he'd be impressed. I think he'd be impressed with how they have, decades after his death, continued to stick to his sort of code of conduct when it comes to the professionalism of running a park, an attention to detail and the guest experience. Those were always things that he felt or what drove the popularity of the parks, and I think to an extent that's absolutely the case. I'm sure there'd be a lot of confusing aspects. I mean, for instance, He was very against facial hair on. Do we have food? No food. I guess we don't need it. He was very against facial hair on the cast members, and the reason for that was back then carnivals had a very dirty reputation, and he didn't want to be, considered a carnival or, something similar to that. But today it's totally different. Like, yeah, maybe that carnival reputation still exists, but I don't think people attribute beards or mustaches to that, so I don't think it's as necessary to ban those things from cast members. In fact, I don't know. I think they just allowed mustaches. I feel like they just changed one of the rules regarding facial hair with cast members, but I'm not 100% sure. And I'm sure he'd be a little disappointed that, Disney is sort of covering the comfortable aspects of the industry that they know work. What's really admirable about Walt is this is a man who started by drawing cartoons for the newspaper, and then he went on to animated cartoons, and then he went on to live action and animated features, and then theme parks, and then even on his deathbed, the man was planning a city, a functioning city. So for him, he obviously was never stopping. It wasn't a matter of like, well, theme parks work, so that we're just going to become the theme park company. It was always, all right, we have this money from the theme park, now what can we do that's new? And I don't think Disney today does that, and it's hard to do that when you're a publicly traded organization that doesn't have such a clear leader the way a Disney or a Steve Jobs or a Bill Gates is. At that point, then you have to answer to shareholders, and you can't be as super innovative. But I'm sure he'd also enjoy it, just to enjoy that it's still here and it's still well loved and it's still a great name and a popular destination. Okay, so the next couple of questions are going to be lightning round. I'm going to answer them as quickly as possible. We're going to start off with the Champ 4427, who asks, which ride do you feel needs an update the most? I would say Ellen's Energy Adventure, just because energy technology has advanced a lot, and I think it's definitely an important thing that we need to talk about, so it should stay relevant and up to date. Ben F asks, if you could go on only one ride per park, which 4 rides would you pick and why? I'm going to forego the why, because the why is the same for all of them. I love them. One ride per park. Magic Kingdom, I would have to say the Haunted Mansion. Epcot, I would have to say Ellen's Energy Adventure, actually. No, Spaceship Earth. Even with the Judi Dench changes, it's still my favorite ride there. So Spaceship Earth, definitely. Hollywood Studios, here, it would have to be a toss-up. I think the Great Movie Ride. No, I think the Great Movie Ride. That would be the one I ride the most. You see a theme, like, I love thrill rides, but they're not my favorite rides here at Disney. That's not what I come here for. I come here for atmosphere, and these rides all provide it and make me think, by thinking about these movies that I've seen or thinking about communication and Spaceship Earth. I love that sort of stuff. Roller coasters are great, but I could always go to Six Flags for a roller coaster. And then Animal Kingdom, I guess Dinosaur. I mean, the ride options there aren't hefty. But I love Dinosaur. Spring Rock 3 asks, do you think Disney will ever buy Universal? No, I do not. I don't think it will be beneficial to them monetarily ever to buy it. As far as theme parks go, their Disney World is extremely popular. They don't need to buy out their competition. In fact, Universal existing helps them because it makes Orlando more of a vacation spot and helps people make that decision to go there and say, we'll do some days in Universal, we'll do some days in Disney World, as opposed to not going at all. So I don't think they'll ever do that. But hey, never say never. I probably wouldn't have thought they'd buy Lucasfilm or Marvel, and here we are, right? And Mr. Tippelf says, do you think we will ever see the Dreamfinder return? And my short answer is possibly, but it will not be in the form it was. I don't think Disney is in the habit of returning things to their previous state, which means I think the hardcore Dreamfinder fans will not be happy with that, which is a shame. But, I mean, that's what Disney's all about. It's always about changing things and moving forward and adapting. So maybe in some incarnation he will exist. Anyway, this has been another successful Minecraft Disney World Q&A. If you have a question, just leave it in the comments. It could be about, again, anything Disney related. And I try to pick out good ones to answer on the video, but for the ones that I don't pick out because I don't have time or I don't think it's as prone to discussion, I do my best to answer them in the comments. So hopefully every question gets some sort of answer. I hope everyone has a fantastic week. Whatever you're doing, make the most of it because it makes it that much better. And I hope to see you all here next week for the next episode of Minecraft Disney's Q&A. Bye, everyone.